As you point out, the income of the top 1% is just growing very substantial. Yeah, it was 3.6. The average was 3.6 million in the 90s. It's now 6.4 million as of 2012. Can you? I think a lot of people get confused by the idea of marginal tax rates. Can you sort of give the short and skinny on the concept of marginal tax rates and what it would mean to substantially raise the top marginal tax rate?
Marginal tax rates, or I should say a progressive tax, works on the principle that you pay more tax as your income goes up. A tax rate is set on the lowest $50,000 of your income, and then a higher tax on the next $50,000, and then a higher tax on the next $50,000, so that as your income goes up, each new growth in income is taxed at a higher rate. Now, even Bill Gates pays no tax on the first $20,000 of his income, because the marginal tax rate on the first $20,000 of your income is zero or very close to zero. He pays a lot of tax on his income over $200,000 or so, because on that amount he's paying the full top tax rate, which I think is currently 41.6%, or it's in that region. Mm-hmm. If people make a lot of money, they pay higher taxes on their last dollar of income. But raising taxes on high incomes, I mean, raising the marginal tax rate from 41.6% to 90% would have absolutely no impact on the taxes that almost everybody pays. Mm. Right? And it's very difficult for people to imagine this, but the United States had a top marginal tax rate on personal income of 90% until the 1960s. It was reduced to 70% in the Kennedy tax reforms. I think that was 1962. It was reduced to 50% in the Nixon tax reforms in, I think it was 1972. I may be a year or two off on the dates. And then it was reduced further by Ronald Reagan, before being increased again by Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. But we had a 90% marginal tax rate under Dwight D. Eisenhower. We had a 70% marginal tax rate under Lyndon Johnson. Mm-hmm. Ordinary people did not pay 90 or 70%. Only the very wealthy paid those rates.
Right, so it's only on, so like if it's over $250,000, you would pay the rate, whatever it is, up to $250,000. And if you made $251,000, right, only on that $1,000 over, would you pay 90%?
Right, exactly.
So you also say, I think this is interesting, the goal of taxes should be to make money as meaningful to a millionaire as it is to you and me. You say highly concentrated incomes undermine the whole idea of the market as an economy. That is, as something that economizes. Can you explain that? I think that's a fascinating idea.
Sure. This is straightforward neoclassical economics. And to be honest, I wish more economists would read the classics of neoclassical economics from the 1910s and 1920s. The idea in economics, in modern economics, is that a dollar represents the same utility to anybody who spends a dollar. So we can always talk about things, prices and income, in terms of dollars, because a dollar means the same thing to me as it does to you. So if we have a scarce commodity, like clean water, if I'm willing to pay a dollar for clean water, I get as much benefit from that as you get by paying a dollar for clean water. And this basic assumption is the cornerstone of arguing that the market economy is the most efficient economic system in the world, because it means that the scarce commodity, clean water, electricity, tons of iron, that scarce commodity always goes to the person who has the greatest need for it. If I'm willing to pay $100 and you're willing to pay $101, that means that you will get greater use out of that commodity than I will. That basic principle only holds if everyone has more or less the same income. Obviously, if I have an annual income of $20,000 and you have an annual income of $20 million, you can always outbid me. If there's one if there's one candy bar left at the store, and I want it, and you want it, you can pay $100,000 for that candy bar. It may not be worth that much to you, but you can always pay it. Right? Money becomes meaningless. And that's why, you read stories about luxury hotel suites where people will stay one night in a luxury hotel at $10,000 a night. And you think, how can one night in a hotel possibly be worth $10,000 to anybody? And the solution to that conundrum is that $10,000 means much more to you or me than it does to a wealthy hedge fund manager or a wealthy web billionaire. To them, $10,000 is nothing. We can use the tax system to make the economy more efficient by taxing high incomes. So if your last $1,000 of income is taxed at 90%, if you're a rich person and you're paying 90% tax on income, then an income of $1,000 to you, that extra $1,000, isn't really $1,000. You had to make $10,000 in order to get $1,000 in spending money. Right? So a high marginal tax rate tends to make things worth just as much to you or me or to a millionaire. And that's incredibly important for efficiency. I know I'm going on, but let me give you one really concrete example.
Please, yeah.
In a country where people have similar incomes, nobody owns a massive pleasure yacht, a 100-meter yacht that they use one time a year. Nobody owns that. Instead, a yachting company owns the yacht, and individual people rent it out for one night. If you're getting married and you want to have a big party, you rent the yacht. In an economy with enormous inequality, super rich people just buy a yacht, leave it parked, nobody uses it. That resource goes completely unused 364 days a year. Well, that's incredibly wasteful. An efficient economy would use that yacht every day. Your wedding, my wedding, somebody's retirement, big birthday party, every day that yacht is in use. An inefficient economy with lots of rich people has rich people owning yachts, trying to impress each other with who has the bigger yacht. And that's what we have in America today.
I'll give another quick example. I just read this article. There's this sort of phenomenon, rich kids of Instagram, these children of fabulously wealthy parents.
Right.
And there's a trend apparently called sinking, where they'll order 2 bottles of, say, $1,000 champagne or something, and one of them is ordered for the express purpose of pouring it down the sink. It's this ostentatious, flashing of wealth and how meaningless it is to them. It's reprehensible.
Ironically, the sociologist Thorsten Veblen wrote a book about conspicuous consumption in the early 1900s. the theory of the leisure class. And that book could just be reissued today because we've reached the same levels of inequality that they had in the early 1900s.
Well, and before we move on from the taxes issue, or Chapter 5, I wanted to ask you about this, too, because you point to this problem that there is this stratification in society where rich people, a lot of other people have talked about this, too, the fabulously wealthy in this country live in essentially a different country. They have gated communities, private security, private schools. So
helicopters to work.
Right. And so they're not connected to the society at large, so they have very little incentive or understanding of the need to engage and invest in, the common good, the commonwealth. Is this going to solve that problem, raising taxes on them? Or is it going to bring them down to the real world? Is that what we need to have happen?
It absolutely does. Look, I've never been to Maine. But I would bet you, you're located in Maine.
That's right. Yep.
I would bet you that all across Maine, you have high schools in small towns that are named after local bankers, lawyers, and doctors, or to which local bankers, lawyers, and doctors contributed when they were built. Ordinary, or I should say leaders in their community, helped build these schools. Right? And all across small-town America, we see monuments to these great Americans of the 19th century who helped build their local towns. Well, they did that because their kids went to the local high school. Their kids drank the water in their town along with everybody else. They lived in the communities that made them rich. Today's rich people don't live in the communities that made them rich. They don't care if we have good public water supply because they don't drink the public water supply. They don't care if we have good public schools because their kids don't go to those public schools. They have no connection to the communities that generate their wealth. In the 19th century, a banker in your local town in Maine lived in that local town in Maine. Today, the people in the bank who work in the bank in Maine are just as poor as everybody else. The person who owns the bank is in New York or Charlotte or another major banking center, and that's the problem.
So let's stay on this issue of taxes, but move to a new chapter. The next chapter in your book, Chapter 6, is refinance Social Security. Now, I think there are a lot of misconceptions around this idea, particularly the idea that Social Security is insolvent, and it's perpetuated by politicians on the right. One, I'm kind of curious if you could sort of tell us why you think the politicians on the right. I mean, they're smart people. They know the numbers. Why are they perpetuating this myth? And then, of course, obviously, please explain how it is a myth, how it is or could remain solvent.
Sure. First of all, Social Security is not insolvent, and there's no such thing as solvent or insolvent when it comes to Social Security. Social Security is simply a benefit that's paid by the American government that is loosely connected to taxes that are paid into the American government. But even if those taxes did not fully cover Social Security benefits, the U.S. government would still pay those Social Security benefits. So there's no issue of whether or not it's solvent. The key thing to keep in mind is that Social Security as a system has never cost the federal budget a cent. The entire outlay in all of the history of Social Security has come from Social Security taxes. Okay. Currently, the projection is that those Social Security taxes will no longer be enough to cover the full outlays of Social Security after 2040 or so. The estimates change every year, 2036, 2042. It depends on how the economy does at any one year. But the projection is that in the distant future, 25 years from now, Social Security will start needing a budget allocation from the federal government. Now, that's what right-wing Republicans mean when they say Social Security will become insolvent. That eventually the government will have to start paying money out of general taxes for Social Security instead of just paying for Social Security out of Social Security taxes. Okay. So we're talking about something that will happen 25 years from now. No one knows for sure whether or not it will happen, but it might happen 25 years from now. Even if it happens, there won't be a big bankruptcy. It's not like Fannie Mae going bankrupt or Freddie Mac going bankrupt. It simply means that eventually we'll have to start paying for Social Security out of general taxes.
Right, and so you point out there are two taxes, correct me if I'm wrong, there's the FICA, the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, and the OASDI, Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance. Those are the two taxes that fund it. Can you explain what those are and how they work?
Well, that's complicated. For that, I'd really suggest people read the book because it's very technical material. But in short,
I'm thinking specifically of the cap. That's the
FICA tax pays for retirement, and OASDI tax pays for Medicare. The FICA tax is capped. So the FICA tax is a 12.4% tax on wages that every American pays on wages, not on investment income, not on business income, only on wages. So first of all, only regular wage employees are paying FICA tax, not people getting hedge fund gains and not people making a killing in the stock market. They're not paying FICA tax. The FICA tax is capped at 107. I'm sorry. The FICA tax base is capped at $117,000 a year. That means that high-income people who get a high wage only pay taxes on the first $117,000 of income. After that, their money is tax-free from a Social Security standpoint. Mm-hmm. That makes Social Security the only regressive tax in the civilized world. It's the only tax that as you make more money, you pay less percentage in taxes. That's a travesty. I mean, it's tied to the bizarre legislative history of the Social Security program and the way it went through Congress.
Yeah, can you explain briefly how that came to be? Because I think that's really important to understand.
It's a funny piece of American legislative history. Franklin Roosevelt wanted a Social Security program to pay pensions for old people. And Franklin Roosevelt was elected mainly by working class people. Republicans at the time said, you can have a tax for your people, but our people don't need a Social Security program. So Franklin Roosevelt and his Secretary of Labor, Frances Perkins, one of the most influential women in American history, came up with a program that they would provide a pension program, an old age pension program, only for working class people, people who earned under a certain amount of money. And the idea was that managers, doctors, lawyers, bankers would not be in the system. Only bona fide working class people would be in the system. In the debates in Congress and in the little ways that legislation gets shifted here and there in committee and through riders and amendments, it changed from a program for poor people into a program on the first few $1,000s of your income. So that instead of only covering working class people, the program covered everybody, but only up to a certain level of their income. Mm-hmm. Which, of course, is a strange thing to have a program that only covers you for the first, the first $5,000 or the first $10,000 of your income, and then after that you don't get retirement insurance. So it was a bizarre legislative quirk that led to the system where benefits go to everybody, but the tax is only a tax on low incomes. It's not a tax on everybody's incomes.
So, Salvatore, I have to ask you, because the way you lay it out in the book and the way you just described it, it does seem sort of absurd, and the solution just materializes out of that quite effortlessly, right? Just eliminate the cap. Why, if it is that simple, why are people not talking about this on the national scale? And why are our candidates not talking about this, whether Republican or Democrat?
Right. Well, it's very simple, but almost everybody in the debate makes more than $120,000 a year. Mm-hmm. People like me, I reached that threshold about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. People like me, people like people who work at Washington think tanks, editors at newspapers, certainly politicians, lawyers, they all make over the cap. And nobody in this group really wants to tax themselves. I think it's that simple, that it's a solution that just doesn't appeal to the sort of people who are on TV promoting solutions.
And so no one is making this very, very simple case, and they're concerning, they're fear-mongering and getting people to be, concerned about Social Security is going to go away and it's just impossible to maintain. But it seems so simple.
Lots of people are making this case. If you go to advocacy organizations on the internet, if you go to think tanks in Washington, okay. I don't have the references at my fingertips, but I could certainly provide them. Mm-hmm. I think that technocratic, disinterested public policy organizations that look at this problem consistently recommend removing the wage cap for Social Security. More ambitious people propose that Social Security tax should also be applied to investment income.
Mm-hmm.
Why should investment income be taxed less than working income?
Right.
That's an ambitious policy. But the policy of just eliminating the cap is very widespread in the policy world. It's just not embraced by politicians and those who pay for campaign contributions.
Okay, I should correct myself. I think Senator Bernie Sanders has made that case that
Sure.
it's the cap. So there is a candidate out there talking about it. And I would like to ask you another general question as we wrap up this portion of our conversation. There's so much more to talk about, and I strongly recommend listeners check out the book 16 for 16 by Salvatore Babones, A Progressive Agenda for a Better America. And we will be talking with Salvatore again here on the Soapbox in the coming weeks. But so back to Bernie Sanders. He makes this case, and whenever he's asked by interviewers how he will realize these sort of legislative and policy proposals that he's making, whether it's Social Security or anything else, especially with an intractable Congress that is presumed to remain Republican after 2016 as of now. He always says that it requires a mass movement, a political revolution, that no president can do this on their own. And so I guess my question to you is, one, do you see a candidate? Is Bernie Sanders the guy that might, pick up this agenda that you've put out there? And can any of these things get through when, as you point out, I think, so many politicians in Washington in particular, I mean, they're all wealthy. They're all wealthy people. So they represent their own interests. They represent, their corporate backers. How do we, as the little people down here, get this agenda to be realized and pushed through? Is there anyone listening?
Right. Well, I'm not going to endorse a candidate. I certainly like Bernie Sanders, but I also like Martin O'Malley. I like Lincoln Chafee. In many ways, I even like Rand Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in the business of endorsing a candidate. But I do think that a candidate can make the difference. I think Franklin Roosevelt made a difference. I think Lyndon Johnson made a difference. I think a presidential candidate has the opportunity to rally people around an idea, to be a focal point for a movement. I mean, mass movements don't just emerge out of the ether.
Mm-hmm.
They need someone who has access to the media, access to the internet. I mean, somebody who can generate attention to push them forward, to offer people a vision. I mean, when Barack Obama ran for president in 2008, he offered people a vision of change, and that rallied millions of people behind him who had not previously been interested in politics, people who wanted change. I don't see any reason why that can't be done again and can't be done with a better outcome.
Well, what do you think happened with Obama? Because I have to say, I mean, I was swept up in 2008, and I really thought that I believed that change was possible and change was coming. And, sometimes people accuse him of having been a cipher, and people just sort of projected what they wanted onto him. But if you go back and you listen to his campaign speeches, he was not a cipher. He was pretty specific about, some relative to the Bush administration, some very progressive changes. And then, he got into office, and he appointed the same economic advisors that Clinton had used that led to the financial disaster in 2008. He capitulated to Wall Street. He didn't try anyone. We've got race relations blowing up around the country, and he really hasn't done a whole lot for that. What if he couldn't do it, even after saying all the right things and mobilizing all the people, how do we sort of get to the point where we can think that, okay, well, now the next person who says those things will be able to do it?
Well, Barack Obama promised a lot of things that he didn't deliver. I think every presidential candidate promises things that maybe he or she can't deliver. But Barack Obama also promised to govern from the center, to be bipartisan, to work with the opposition, to reach across the aisle. And I think that was the fundamental fatal flaw. I think the kinds of policies we need are policies that Republicans have categorically said they will not support. Not a single Republican voted for the Affordable Health Care Act, the Obamacare Act, despite the fact that the single-payer system was dropped from the act in order to make it more bipartisan. So I think the fundamental flaw in the Obama approach was being conciliatory, was trying to reach across and build bridges with the opposition, when what we needed in 2009 was a single-minded emphasis on getting the things that Americans needed.
Well, Salvatore Babones, author of 16 for 16, A Progressive Agenda for a Better America. This book is great, very accessible, and there are 16 chapters of which we have only just begun to scratch the surface with. I hope you will come back to the Soapbox in the future, Salvatore.
I would love to.
Well, thank you very much for being here, and thanks for tuning into the Soapbox. Thank you again, Salvatore.